Okay, so we're going to chunk up the chapter on lipids so that you can understand it. There's a lot of chemistry in this section, but I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible for you because it's really essential that you understand this to understand health promotion and disease prevention when we talk about lipids. So lipids, so when I say lipids, those are substances that don't dissolve in water, and we tend in the science of nutrition and just in general terminology to use the term fat to refer to lipids, but we are usually referring, when we break lipids down in the discussion about nutrition, to triglycerides, and then we will also break down and talk about phospholipids and sterols, but normally we're referring to triglycerides. So what's a triglyceride? Here's a great picture, nice and big, of a triglyceride molecule. It consists of, and this is essential to know for the test and for understanding the types of triglycerides, is we normally refer to this as fat. It consists of a glycerol molecule, that's the blue chemical structure on the right-hand side, glycerol, and 3 fatty acids. Those are the orange molecules that are connected to the blue one, triglyceride. When you break that down, tri meaning 3, so 3 fatty acids connected to a glyceride molecule. So let's just talk about those 3 fatty acid molecules. So if this is a picture of just one fatty acid molecule, a fatty acid molecule is a 16 carbon chain with an acid group at one end and a methyl group at the other end. The methyl group is considered the omega end, and that's going to be real important when you understand the concepts of omega-3 fatty acids and their importance in the diet. So the omega end and the acid group end. So what are saturated fatty acids? I keep talking about they're unhealthy, they're not good for you. Why is that? And really, what does that mean? So when I refer to a saturated fat, I'm really referring to a saturated fatty acid. And basically what that means, and this is a great visual of it, is that it's fully saturated with hydrogen atoms and contains only single bonds between the carbon atoms of the carbon chain. So you see all those hydrogen atoms that are saturating that fatty acid, and all the carbon chains are single bonds between the carbon atoms from the acid group to the omega end. So saturated fatty acids, they're found in both plants and animal products, and they're typically solids at room temperature. So in this picture you see on the outside of the steak is a solid at room temperature because it's high in saturated fatty acids. This chemical structure, see the fat marbling, why is it melting? Could I leave that steak out overnight and that fat would never melt because it's saturated, and that's why they manifest themselves as solids at room temperature. Unsaturated fatty acids, so what makes them unsaturated is they're missing the hydrogens, and it contains at least one double bond between the carbons of the carbon chain. So you can see in that picture the carbon-carbon double bond, that's oleic acid, and it is missing some hydrogens there. The hydrogens are replaced by the double bond. So typically these are liquid at room temperature, unsaturated fatty acids. So vegetable oils are liquid at room temperature because they're high in unsaturated fatty acids. They bend at that carbon-carbon double bond, and you can see how the glycerol molecule with the fatty acids and the fatty acids are bent. These bent chains of fatty acids prevent them from being tightly packed and allow the oil to flow. So let's look at it again. So there's different types of unsaturated fat or unsaturated fatty acids. The first type is monounsaturated fatty acids, meaning they contain one double bond. Mono means one, along the carbon chain. Polyunsaturated fatty acids, or sometimes we refer to them as PUFAs, unsaturated fatty acids, PUFAs. They contain two or more double bonds along the carbon chain. So mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids are very important in our discussion of healthy fats. Unsaturated fatty acids, again, bend at the double bond site, changing the shape of the fatty acids. They don't stack tightly like the saturated fatty acids. That's why they manifest themselves at liquids at room temperature. So let's delve even deeper. So the location of the double bond in polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, chemists identify the location of the first double bond from the methylene. Remember, the omega end was on the left in those pictures, by assigning it the Greek letter omega. So we hear a lot about omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids. Those are types of polyunsaturated fatty acids, and what the omega-3 and omega-6 refers to, they simply refer to the location of the first double bond in the carbon chain. So the body needs fatty acids, and we can make all but two, and the two we can't make, this is why there's such a focus in our diet, is alpha-linolenic acid, that's omega-3 fatty acid, and linoleic acid, that's omega-6 fatty acid. So let's talk about omega-6 fatty acids. They're used to make ARA, arachidonic acid. It's another omega-6 fatty acid. Our bodies, the humans, don't have the enzyme to make omega-6s, and therefore can only make ARA if linoleic acid is provided in the diet. And we get that from corn oil, safflower oil, and soybean oil and nuts. And corn and safflower and soybean oil are in most of our foods, so we typically probably get more omega-6 than we need. Omega-3 fatty acids is linoleic acid, is used to make EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid, and deoxyhexanoic acid, DHA. So EPA and DHA are considered omega-3 fatty acids. The human body does not have the enzyme to make omega-3s, and therefore can only make EPA and DHA if it's provided in the diet. So we typically think of dietary sources of omega-3s as flax seeds and flaxseed oils, walnuts, fishes. You know, you're supposed to eat a lot of fish, and grass-fed pasture-raised animals. You probably noticed we see a lot of DHA now being added to dairy products. So you may buy milk that has DHA added into it. The idea behind it is to increase the amount of omega-3 fatty acids from dairy sources. So what's the deal between omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids? Well, the diet contains a ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 that's not optimal for health. We actually consume more omega-6s than we need, and not enough omega-3s. So here it's the recommendation is a ratio of 5:1 of omega-6 consumption versus omega-3, but on average we're consuming a ratio of 15 to 20 to 1 of omega-6 and to omega-3. So the focus with dietary consumption of lipids or triglycerides, or bringing it all the way down to omega-3 and omega-6, is to reduce our consumption of processed vegetable oils such as soybeans, safflower, corn, and canola oils, and consume more fish and flaxseed oil to help correct this ratio. So let's talk about mixed triglycerides. So typically when we eat, it's usually a mixture of unsaturated and saturated fatty acids. We typically don't consume just one or the other, just like carbohydrates. They're usually, consumption is a mixture. Liquid oils, some contain a certain percentage of saturated fatty acids within their triglycerides. It's just the ratio of unsaturated to saturated. Solid fats, though, also same thing, contain a little bit of unsaturated fatty acids, but the greatest number of saturated fats, the saturated fatty acids, is greater than unsaturated fatty acids. So let's talk about a mixed triglyceride. Here's one. So it shows one chain that is not bent because there are no carbon double bonds, and the other two fatty acids in this glycerol molecule have the carbon-carbon double bond, so it's bent. So it's called a mixed triglyceride. So here you can kind of see this. This is a very common picture that you may have seen before. So the purple color is the amount of saturated fat in these different types of fats. Omega-3 is in the green, red is omega-6, and blue is unsaturated. So we see our roast beef, butter, cheddar cheese, coconut oil, very high in saturated fat. Corn oil, canola, olive oil, avocado, salmon, walnuts, flax seeds, all very low in saturated fat, which is good. Monounsaturated fats, olive oil is very high in monounsaturated fats. Flaxseed oil is very high in omega-3s, and walnuts are high in omega-6, and so is corn oil. So those are the ones we want to reduce a little bit along with the saturated fat. Rancidity, let's just talk briefly about this because the book talks about it. So fats can become rancid when they're exposed to oxygen. Saturated fats are more chemically stable and they don't become rancid as much. So if you had a grandmother or someone that collected the oil from the meats and the bacon and then put it on the stove in this bin and it just sat out there for days and you thought, how come it's not going bad? That's because it's a saturated fat. It doesn't go rancid as quickly, but unsaturated fatty acids are more vulnerable due to their double bonds. So you'll see that olive oils are in glass containers or dark colored containers. They suggest that you keep your liquid oils in glass, not in iron containers, because it can make them rancid. I know lots of people have gotten bagged chips out of a vending machine and opened up and this horrible smell was in there. That's because the unsaturated fatty acids in the chips have gone rancid. Flax and flaxseed, if you eat that and you leave it exposed to light, you know that it can smell and go rancid. Hydrogenation, important to talk about. In order to protect fats from going rancid and to increase their shelf life, food manufacturers use hydrogenated oils. This is where the hydrogens are added back to the carbon-carbon double bonds and unsaturated fatty acids, making them more saturated. So, and during this process, the hydrogenation is where they become trans fats. Now trans fats are on the labels. We're looking for them. They're not healthy. They do contribute to heart disease, so important to understand that. Trans fats are in the news, margarine versus butter. What about palm oils? I really want you to understand that palm oils are still, or in tropical oils, what they did is once they pulled the trans fat out, they put in tropical oils, and these may not necessarily be helpful as well. So read the link this week about trans fats. That's the end. We'll see you in the next discussion.